Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I wish to discuss the idea that POTS is a condition that some people grow out of. Now, this idea is especially a piece of advice that will be given to especially adolescents who develop POTS. So the thinking is that someone, they're 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever, and they develop POTS, and then they're told by their doctor or consultant that they may grow out of it over the next few years. So by the time that they're in their early 20s, they will no longer have POTS, potentially, not guaranteed. But that's the sort of standard piece of advice that is given. Now, on the face of it, it's hard to know what's going on with this piece of advice because there's certainly very minimal evidence in terms of the symptomology and pathophysiology of POTS that has been identified that would imply that growing up a bit, getting a bit older, or growing a bit taller, to be a little bit cheeky for a second, should have any effect on the pathophysiology of POTS. That simply, from a scientific level, it's a ludicrous idea. If you think of net protein deficiency, blood vessel constriction problems, mast cell activation problems in the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone network that leads to all kinds of electrolyte and particularly sodium imbalances that leads to low blood volume, there's no indication whatsoever that growing up a little bit more should have any impact on any of those things. Not to mention the state of the autonomic nervous system being in a hardwired state of crisis, which is kind of known but not talked about enough, because that is the cause of POTS. Anyway, so there's very little rationale to think that growing up a little more or letting 6 or 7 years pass in and of themselves is a factor that should lead to the resolution of those problems. Because if that were the case, then everyone would get better. Let 7 years pass, then you'd be grand. But that's not what happens, of course. Now some people, as I mentioned in the previous video, do get better. And I think really that's what this advice is pointing to. It's pointing to the fact that the medical researchers and professionals have observed the fact that indeed some people do recover from POTS. And so when they give this piece of advice, that's really a nod to that fact. So they're acknowledging the fact that some people get better, but they're not in giving the advice that you may grow out of it. They're not. It's a kind of platitude. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but I think you'll understand what I mean. And it's sort of saying, well, we know people get better, and we're just going to explain that by suggesting that it's the passage of time that leads people to get better. And we're not going to explore, in a really targeted way, why it is that those people get better. Really, if you think about it, those teenagers who do grow out of it, they're not really, but, from the point of view of healthcare professionals for a moment, a really interesting study would be to ask those teenagers, what did they do that other teenagers who still have the condition, what did those who got better, what did they do that those who didn't grow out of it do, and see if there's a kind of pattern in terms of behavior or something also mental that they might have done that might lead to recovery and therefore be explicable. But that's not what is done. So instead, it's just sort of, well, some people grow out of it, and that's a very inadequate explanation for why someone might get better from POTS. If you think about, as I said earlier, all the pathophysiology and what's going on and the many different varied problems that are happening in POTS, it's a very, very poor explanation that the reason someone might get better is because they grow out of it. So what I really think this is simply a nod to the observable fact that some people do get better, and it's simply the best that has been come up with so far in terms of trying to explain it, that the passage of time may lead to resolution. And it's really, but the more that narrative gets ensconced and becomes embedded around POTS, the more people believe it, and the more it means that it encourages a kind of fatalism, that some people are destined to get better for reasons that are unknown, and some people are destined not to, and we'll just see what the luck of the draw is. Rather than saying, oh wow, some people are getting better. Why are they getting better? Let's really study those people. It's not accidental. Someone doesn't get better from such an incredibly debilitating illness for no reason. There's got to be a reason. So that's where that line of thought should lead people, rather than to a kind of fatalistic, well, some people might get better from growing out of it and some people might not. Now, I believe that those teenagers who do get better from POTS don't do so because they grow a bit taller, but because they accidentally rewire their limbic systems. The limbic system being the start of the autonomic nervous system, which is in crisis in POTS. So they accidentally rewire their autonomic nervous systems out of crisis. And this could happen for all kinds of reasons, and it probably would happen over quite a lengthy period of time, much longer than it does with the targeted intervention that is the dynamic neural retraining system, which I followed to recover and others follow to recover. So I think that they accidentally rewire their limbic systems. They accidentally get themselves out of flight or fight, and the adrenaline ceases to go off, and that leads to the healing. That's my feeling. Of course, exercise and good diet and so on may also help. Of course, that all helps. But anyway, that's not being considered, and instead we have the situation where this piece of advice is given widely to people, and it's not helpful. It increases fatalism. It lets the general medical narrative off the hook a bit with POTS, because it just sort of, it's kind of saying, well, some people get better, but we don't know why, and you may be one of those people too, and that encourages a kind of acceptance of the status quo, I think. But I certainly don't want to imply that there aren't many medical researchers who are doing a lot of fantastic work in identifying what's going on in POTS. So that's all I think I want to say about that. I'll briefly check my notes. Yes, it's just important to remember, if you've been given that advice, maybe you are a teenager, or you were a teenager and you were given this advice, that you may grow out of it. I think it's coming from not a particularly scientific perspective. It's simply coming from the observable fact that some people do get better over time, but what it isn't doing is asking why those people get better. And I think if that were to happen, if those people were to be studied, what they did that was different to those who don't get better, then I think we would be pointing towards accidental brain rewiring, which I think is possible. And if I look back to my own experience, when I was at my worst with POTS, before I even started the DNRS, I think there were some things that I was doing that led to a stabilization to a degree, and a somewhat lesser, although it was still constant, but lesser release of adrenaline. So I think that's possible that people can stumble into that. But it's not as targeted or as focused or as specific and well worked out as the DNRS in terms of speaking to what a traumatized limbic system needs to know that life is safe again. So I obviously always encourage people to go and check that program out. So that's all I want to say about that. I hope you find this video thought-provoking, helpful, and I wish you a pleasant day wherever you are.